Hello, everybody. I want to welcome you here to Prog Monster. My name is Murph. I am the host of this show, a show dedicated to progressive rock and other forms of rock music. We're here for the third installment of the mini-series entitled Decades. This is a series that Ben and I put together at his suggestion. He said we should do one for each of the decades in which rock music was predominantly dominated for us. And so we started in the 60s, we then did the 70s, and we are now here today to do the 1980s. I've picked my 10 favorite albums from the 1980s. This wasn't as hard as people might think. Most of the ones I pretty much knew were going to be in there, but there's a couple at the bottom, at least the one at the bottom. That was a bit of a choice. I had about 3 or 4 albums. I could have thrown any one of the 4 in there, and then I decided on the one that I got. So we're going to do this the way we normally do, which is my 10th favorite all the way up to my number 1 favorite. Now, the ranking of the other 9 could have went anywhere anyway, because they're all masterpiece albums, and so therefore could have been any way that I wanted to. There was one album in there that I wasn't 100% sure that it came out in the 1980s, and sure enough, it didn't. It came out in 79, so I plucked it out of there. Unfortunately, it doesn't get any knowledge for this one. So we're going to start with the number 10, go up to number 1, or the least of the best. That's normally the way I do it. So the number 10 album, this was the one that I chose among 5 albums, and I just think this one has more of an upside than the other ones because they're all older albums that I've had for a while. This one, Misplaced Childhood by Marillion, absolutely killer album. I'm not sure though that this is going to end up being my favorite Marillion album. I have a couple other ones there that could end up taking that spot, but for right now, this is my number 10 album for the 1980s. And this, I believe, came out in 85. The next album up is an album that would have been much higher had I done this 5-10 years ago. Probably would have finished in the top 5, but it's slid a bit over the years. I just don't listen to it as much. Maybe a bit of a burnout, I guess. So we're talking about Iron Maiden's Number of the Beast. Easily would have been a top 5 album at one point, but it's kind of slipped away as time has burned it out slightly. A great album, launched this group for me as well. Next album, again, same thing. Probably would have been a top 3 or 4 album if I had done this a while back, but it slipped a bit over the years. But it's the first of the 1980 releases from the year 1980, AC/DC's Back in Black. I have a number of albums from that year, one of my favorite years in rock. At least 5 or 6 of the albums that we're going to do today came from that year. Next album up. This album has really come on over the years. I loved it when it came out. I really love it now. We're talking about Judas Priest, Screaming for Vengeance. Probably my favorite Priest album. Definitely one of my favorite albums of all time, and is going to finish here in 7th spot for 1980. The next album out, which is number 6, another album for 1980. That was actually from the 1980s, not 1980. That was actually from 1982. The album that comes next, finishing 6th, also from the year 1980 for the 1980s, is Yes's Drama. This was my first Yes album as well. Came out in the same year as many of these albums did. Fantastic album, coming here at number 6. And I think it's the only album that they did that really is one of my favorite Yes albums that John Anderson didn't sing on. Next album out is a little bit of an outlier. It's different than most of the other stuff here. Came out in 1986 as well. Really strong album. Still one of my favorite albums. I still like to listen to it quite a bit. And that's Graceland by Paul Simon from 1986. That'll be number 5. Number 4, this is an album that has really grown over time. I loved it when it first came out. I still love it. It's getting stronger all the time. Peter Gabriel's 3, also from 1980. Excellent album. Games Without Frontiers. What a killer tune, man. Now we're into the bottom, or the top 3, if you might wish. And I didn't say this at the beginning, but I should have said this, is that we will not have more than 2 albums per band. I did that in the 1960s. I've done that in the 1970s, and it will continue here in the 1980s. Number 3, Born Again, Black Sabbath. Yeah, it's a bit murky, but the songs on here are absolutely killer. Among my favorite Black Sabbath songs. Definitely one of my favorite Black Sabbath albums. It's been overtaken by Masters of Reality overall, but for the 1980s, it's still strong enough to finish here third. The next one, also from the same band, Black Sabbath, Heaven and Hell. This was a killer album. This is the album for me that really launched heavy metal. Up until this point, I wasn't sure I really liked heavy metal. This really put it on the map. It's my favorite Sabbath album, my favorite album by them. Number 2 here for the 1980s. Also come out in 1980 itself. And then the number 1 album, which came out in 1980 from my favorite band and my favorite album by them. One of my favorite albums of all time. This is Rush's Permanent Waves. Yeah, I love this album. This is the album that launched Rush for me. Also kind of still has a kind of a sentimental favorite in many ways. It's burned out quite a bit over the years, but still is going to retain its number 1 spot here for the 1980s. Also came out in 1980. So now we're just going to reiterate them. Number 1, Rush, Permanent Waves from 1980. Black Sabbath's Heaven and Hell from 1980. Black Sabbath's Born Again from 1983. Peter Gabriel 3 from 1980. Paul Simon, Graceland from 1986. Yes's Drama from 1980. Judas Priest's Screaming for Vengeance from 1982. AC/DC's Back in Black from 1980. Iron Maiden's Number of the Beast from 1982. And last but not least, Marillion's Misplaced Childhood from 1985. Now, some of the honorable mentions, I'll give you a little bit of a list of some of the albums that were close, but not close enough. I'll give you the ones that I was considering for that last spot first. Blue Oyster Cult's Fire of Unknown Origin, great album. Triumph's Progressions of Power and Allied Forces were 2 of the albums in the running for that last spot as well. And Ozzy Osbourne's Diary of a Madman, which also was in the running for that spot as well. Some of the other albums that I think were great and are amongst my favorite: Thin Lizzy's Thunder and Lightning, Dio's Holy Diver, Whitesnake's Come and Get It, Ozzy Osbourne's Blizzard of Oz, of course, The Police's Synchronicity, The Kinks' Come Dancing, or Don't Forget to Dance, I can't remember which is the title of the album, and Men at Work, which was Business as Usual. All those albums would be considered to be a top 10 or amongst my top favorite albums for the 1980s. So I hope you've enjoyed this episode of Decades, my favorite 10 albums from the 1980s, and we will be back in 2 weeks with the 4th episode, which will be Decades from the 1990s. That one should be interesting because I don't know, I can only think of half a dozen albums from that time period that I've considered, but there's other albums that I'm not sure about where they're from that I think will be included in this as well. So anyways, I hope you've enjoyed this. If you have, please hit the like and subscribe. That's much appreciated. Don't forget to hit the notification bell. Any comments, or if you want to put your top 10, you can do that at the bottom. That would be great as well. And we will see you next time here on Decades Have a good evening and goodbye from Prog Monster.